This video was brought to you by Incogni. 2023 has been a dramatic year, with conflicts across the globe from Israel to Sudan and Myanmar to Colombia. And all of this chaos can make the news hard to follow. So in this video, we thought we'd go through every new and ongoing war in 2023. And a quick warning, there's quite a few. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, to give this video some structure, we're going to go continent by continent, beginning with the Americas, with Mexico, where the long-running war on drugs has escalated recently, despite the country's president pledging it would end in 2018. In January, there were clashes between the Mexican army and the Sinaloa cartel following the arrest of drug lord El Chapo's son. In fact, this spike in violence was so significant that it prompted some US Republicans to call for US military intervention against cartels in Mexico, something that the Mexican president rejected as irresponsible and offensive. In Colombia, the country's 60-year civil conflict is still ongoing. A historic peace agreement did see Marxist guerrillas from FARC, the country's biggest rebel group, lay down their arms in 2017. But dissidents and other groups like the ELN remain active. While there have been some clashes with FARC dissidents recently, a 6-month ceasefire with the ELN did begin in August, and a 10-month ceasefire with FARC dissidents is due to begin this month. Over in Europe, the war in Ukraine has continued throughout 2023, with Ukrainian forces earlier this year relaunching their much-awaited counteroffensive aimed at breaking through Russian lines and recapturing territory, though in reality this progress has been pretty slow and grueling. This year has seen an increase in attacks by Ukraine on Russian-occupied territory and Russia proper, largely using both air and sea drones, including a second attack on the Crimean Bridge and multiple drone strikes targeting Moscow. Next up, let's move to Africa, where insurgencies aren't always confined within borders. And that's particularly true for West Africa, where there's an ongoing Islamist insurgency by Al-Qaeda and IS-linked groups, which have continued to plague the region, which itself has further been destabilized by a series of coups. For instance, Nigeria continues its battle with Boko Haram in its north, while Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are among the worst affected by insurgencies. In Mali, Al-Qaeda-linked insurgents are besieging the city of Timbuktu, and there's been a resumption of hostilities with Tuareg-led separatist groups in the north. While the coup in Niger back in July raised the risk of an interstate conflict, as West Africa bloc ECOWAS threatened to launch a military intervention if the ousted president was not reinstated. But this ECOWAS intervention now looks unlikely for a variety of reasons. Islamist insurgencies are also ongoing in East Africa too, most notably in Somalia, where the government is currently trying to seize back control of territory held by al-Shabaab, who have also carried out attacks across the border in Kenya. In Sudan, a civil war between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary erupted in April, which has now resulted in more than 9,000 fatalities and millions of refugees, with most of them taking place in Khartoum and the western region of Darfur. Ethiopia is also still in conflict, despite a formal end of the Tigray War in November of last year. That's because this year, conflict broke out in the country's Amhara region over the Ethiopian army's attempts to disarm the regional militia called Fano, prompting the Ethiopian government to declare a 6-month state of emergency back in August. Also in Eastern and Central Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to face a series of protracted armed conflicts involving rebel groups in its east, while the Central African Republic's civil war is still ongoing after more than a decade. Though with the help of the Wagner Group and others, the government says that it's now restored its authority over 85% of the territory. Nonetheless, the situation remains volatile, and there's grave concern over the human rights situation in the region. In the Middle East, Syria's civil war is still going 12 years on. though President Assad now looks safe in his position and frontline fighting has mostly subsided. Nonetheless, Syria is still far from peaceful, and there's recently been an uptick in violence, as Turkey, which occupies some of northern Syria, has taken a more aggressive stance towards US-backed Kurdish militants in the southeast. Violence between Israel and Palestine hasn't been limited to the exchange of rocket fire or individual attacks this year. That's because an unprecedented attack occurred in October when Hamas militants broke out of the Gaza Strip and launched a full-scale surprise offensive which saw them overrun towns and villages in southern Israel, killing, at the time of writing, at least 900 people and taking dozens of hostages. The Israeli government in response bombarded Gaza and vowed a complete siege of the small but dense territory of 2 million people, with the Israeli defense minister saying that it meant no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Progress has been made this year towards the end of the war in Yemen, with a ceasefire largely holding and ongoing negotiations between the Houthis on one side and the Saudis on the other. A breakthrough agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, who back the Houthis, to re-establish diplomatic ties has raised hopes that a settlement can be reached to end Yemen's 9-year war, though there is still a long way to go, and Yemen's humanitarian situation remains dire. The breakaway region of Nagorno-Karabakh was once again at the center of a conflict this year. But this time, Azerbaijan, through a 24-hour military campaign, managed to fully take control of the territory after blockading it for months. The ethnic Armenian separatists in the region have agreed to disarm, and its leadership have announced the dissolution of the unrecognized republic. In the wake of Azerbaijan's takeover, nearly all of the region's 120,000-strong Armenian population has fled to Armenia, in what the country is described as an ethnic cleansing. Next up, Myanmar remains racked by civil war more than 2 years since a coup overthrew the country's civilian government. Now, this conflict is largely between the military junta and the exiled National Unity Government, whose armored wing is now allied with a number of local armed groups. Now, the junta is increasingly using airstrikes to try and counter the widespread armed resistance, with the UN saying that the military and its allies are engaging in more frequent and audacious war crimes and crimes against humanity. So that just about wraps up our list, and as you can see, there are lots of things that have already happened this year, with many millions of people affected. Let us know which areas you think are overlooked and which ones deserve more attention from the international community. A couple of years ago, I was the victim of identity theft, and I only found out when I got a court letter saying that I owed money to a broadband company at an address I'd never lived at. And I'm not alone here either, with victims of data breaches rising by 41.5% in 2022. Now, all of that stolen data is very often being added to commercial databases, with data brokers potentially aggregating your personal information, including your name and aliases, social security number, login credentials, home address, location history, online activity, and more. All of which is available for purchase by businesses and could fall into the hands of criminals too. Fortunately though, Incogni are here to help. That's because Incogni reach out to data brokers on your behalf, request your data's removal, and deal with any objections. Plus, as brokers often continue to collect data even after takedown requests, Incogni continue to keep watch. So whenever a new record pops up on a data broker site, Incogni will automatically take care of that too. And even if you're not worried about your data being stolen, we all deal with endless junk mail and robocallers, both issues that Incogni's services could help cut down. So create an account using our link in the description, grant Incogni the ability to work on your behalf, and sit back as they make you safer. Plus, by using our link, you'll get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Thanks for checking them out, using our link, and thanks to Incogni for sponsoring this video.